Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming together once again to join in the study of Torah, immersing ourselves both in the words that have been written for us, in the relationships that we create with one another, and in that way we create new words and new meanings of Torah through our shared companionship and study together. We are in Parshat Bo, which begins in the book of Exodus, chapter 10, verse 1. I'd like to invite everyone, if you'd like to go ahead and unmute yourselves, and together we can recite our blessing, and then we'll return to have everyone remute, and then we'll start sharing by the reading of our Torah portion, and then we'll have some study together. So if you'd like to go ahead and unmute, and together we can recite our blessing. Baruch atah
Adonai,
Eloheinu melech
Elohim,
asher nishkanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot divrei Torah. Thank you, God, for this opportunity of immersing ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. So again, if everyone would go ahead and mute themselves, and then I'll begin by reading a few verses from our Torah portion, and then I'll invite others to share in the reading of verses, and then we'll have an opportunity for our study and sharing of insights. So again, we're starting on chapter 10, verse 1. Then Adonai said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his courtiers, in order that I may display these my signs among them, and that you may recount in the hearings of your sons and of your sons' sons how I made a mockery of the Egyptians, and how I displayed my signs among them, in order that you may know that I am Adonai." So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said to him, "Thus says Adonai, the God of the Hebrews, how long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, that they may worship me. For if you refuse to let my people go, tomorrow I will bring locusts on your territory. They shall cover the surface of the land so that no one will be able to see the land. They shall devour the surviving remnant that was left to you after the hail, and they shall eat away all your trees that grow in the field. Moreover, they shall fill your palaces and the houses of all your courtiers and of all the Egyptians, something that neither you nor neither your fathers nor your fathers' fathers have seen from the day they appeared on earth to this day." With that, he turned and left Pharaoh's presence. Jim and Peggy, would you like to read some verses beginning at verse 7?
Thank you very much. Pharaoh's courtiers said to him, "How long shall this one be a snare to us? Let the men go to worship Adonai their God. Are you not yet aware that Egypt is lost?" So Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh, and he said to them, "Go, worship Adonai your God. Who are the ones to go?" Moses replied, "We will all go. Young and old, we will go with our sons and daughters, our flocks and herds, for we must observe the Lord's festival." But he said to them, Adonai be with you, the same as I mean to let your children go with you. Clearly, you are bent on mischief. No, you men folk go and worship Adonai, since that is what you want. And they were expelled from Pharaoh's presence.
Then Adonai said to Moses, "Hold out your arm over the land of Egypt for the locusts, that they may come upon the land of Egypt and eat up all the grasses in the land, whatever the hail has left." So Moses held out his rod over the land of Egypt, and Adonai drove an east wind over the land all that day and all night. And when morning came, the east wind had brought the locusts. Locusts invaded all the land of Egypt and settled within all the territory of Egypt in a thick mass. Never before had there been so many, nor will there ever be so many again. They hid all the land from view, and the land was darkened, and they ate up all the grasses of the field and all the fruit of the trees which the hail had left, so that nothing green was left of trees or grass of the field in all the land of Egypt.
Thank you both so much. Let me invite Richard. Would you like to read some beginning at verse 16?
I'm sorry, verse what? 16.
Yes.
Pharaoh hurriedly summoned Moses and Aaron and said, I stand guilty before the Lord your God and before you. Forgive my offense just this once, and plead with the Lord your God that he but remove this death from me. So he left Pharaoh's presence and pleaded with the Lord. The Lord caused a shift to a very strong west wind, which lifted the locusts and hurled them into the sea of reeds. Not a single locust remained in all the territory of Egypt. But the Lord stiffened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the Israelites go. Then the Lord said to Moses, hold out your arm toward the sky, that there may be darkness on the land of Egypt, a darkness that can be touched. Moses held out his arm toward the sky, and a thick darkness descended upon all the land of Egypt for 3 days. People could not see one another, and for 3 days no one could get up from where he was, but all the Israelites enjoyed light in their dwellings.
Thank you, Richard. Karen, would you like to read a little bit? If you'd like, you have to unmute if you'd like to share with us.
I don't have the book in front of me.
Okay, that's very good. Let me invite Margot. Would you like to read, unmute, and then read beginning at verse 24? Yes, Margot, you'll need to unmute if you'd like to share with us.
Is that better?
Very good.
Okay. So we are at
Verse
24. Pharaoh then summoned Moses and said, go worship the Lord. Only your flocks and your herds shall be left behind. Even your children may go with you. But Moses said, you yourself must provide us with sacrifices and burnt offerings to offer up to the Lord our God. Our own livestock too shall go along with us. Not a hoof shall remain behind, for we must select them, selected for the worship of the Lord our God. And we shall not know with what we are to worship the Lord until we arrive there. But the Lord stiffened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not agree to let them go. Pharaoh said to him, be gone from me. Take care not to see me again. For the moment you look upon my face, you shall die. And Moses replied, you have spoken rightly. I shall not see your face again.
Oh, thank you, Margot. And Steve, would you like to begin reading at top of verse chapter 11?
Yes, thank you. And the Eternal One said to Moses, I will bring but one more plague upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt. After that, he shall let you go from here. Indeed, when he lets you go, he will drive you out of here, one and all. Tell the people to borrow, each man from his neighbor and each woman from hers, objects of silver and gold. The Eternal disposed the Egyptians favorably toward the people. Moreover, God's envoy, Moses, was much esteemed in the land of Egypt, among Pharaoh's courtiers and among the people. Moses said, thus says the Eternal, toward midnight I will go forth among the Egyptians, and every male firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on his throne to the firstborn of the slave girl who is behind the millstones, and all the firstborn of the cattle. And there shall be a loud cry in all the land of Egypt, such has never been or will ever be again. but not a dog shall snarl at any of the Israelites, at human or beast, in order that you may know that the Eternal makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. Okay. Then all these courtiers of yours shall come down to me and bow low to me, saying, Depart, you and all the people who follow you. After that I will depart. And he left Pharaoh's presence in hot anger. Now the Eternal had said to Moses, Pharaoh will not heed you, in order that my marvels may be multiplied in the land of Egypt. Moses and Aaron had performed all these marvels before Pharaoh. But the Eternal had stiffened the heart of Pharaoh, so that he would not let the Israelites go from his land.
Thank you, Steve. Dave, would you like to read at the start of chapter 11?
The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, This month shall mark for you the beginning of the months. It shall be the first of the months of the year for you. Speak to the whole community of Israel and say that on the 10th of this month, each of them shall take a lamb to a family, a lamb to a household. But if the household is too small for a lamb, let him share one with his neighbor who dwells nearby. In proportion to the number of persons, you shall contribute for the lamb according to what each household will eat. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a yearling male. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. You shall keep watch over it until the 14th day of the month, and all the assembled congregation of the Israelites shall slaughter it at twilight. They shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and on the lintel of the house in which they are to eat it. They shall eat the flesh that same night, and they shall eat it roasted over the fire with unleavened bread and with bitter herbs. Do not eat any of it raw or cooked in any way with water, but roasted, head, legs, entrails over the fire. You shall not leave any of it over until morning. If any of it is left until morning, you shall burn it. This is how you shall eat it: your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it hurriedly. It is a Passover offering to the Lord. For that night I will go through the land of Egypt and strike down every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and I will mete out punishments to all the gods of Egypt. I, the Lord. And the blood on the houses where you are staying shall be a sign for you. When I see the blood, I will pass over you, so that no plague will destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you so much. Gary, would you like to read beginning at verse 14?
Yes, thank you. This day shall be to you one of remembrance. You shall celebrate it as a festival to the Eternal throughout the ages. You shall celebrate it as an institution for all time. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the very first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. For whoever eats leavened bread from the first day to the 7th day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. You shall celebrate a sacred occasion on the first day and a sacred occasion on the 7th day. No work at all shall be done on them. Only what every person is to eat, that alone may be prepared for you. You shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for on this very day I brought your ranks out of the land of Egypt. You shall observe this day throughout the ages as an institution for all time. In the first month, from the 14th day of the month at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. No leaven shall be found in your houses for 7 days. For whoever eats what is leavened, that person, whether a stranger or a citizen of the country, shall be cut off from the community of Israel. You shall eat nothing leavened. In all your settlements, you shall eat unleavened bread.
Thank you so much, Gary. Jay Isaac, would you like to read beginning at verse 21?
Sure, Rabbi. Thank you. 21. Moses then summoned all the elders of Israel and said to them, Go pick out lambs for your families and slaughter the Passover offering. Take a bunch of hyssop, dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and apply some of the blood that is in the basin to the lintel and to the 2 doorposts. None of you shall go outside the door of his house until morning. For when the Lord goes through to smite the Egyptians, he will see the blood on the lintel and the 2 doorposts, and the Lord will pass over the door and not let the destroyer enter and smite your home. You shall observe this as an institution for all time, for you and for your descendants. And when you enter the land that the Lord will give you, as he has promised, you shall observe this rite. And when your children ask you, what do you mean by this rite? You shall say, it is the Passover sacrifice to Adonai, because he passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt, and he smote the Egyptians, but saved our houses. The people then bowed low in homage, and the Israelites went and did so, just as Adonai had commanded Moses and Aaron, so they did.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you so much. David and Susan, would you like to read beginning at verse 29?
Yes, thank you very much. In the middle of the night, Adonai struck down all the male firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the cattle. And Pharaoh arose in the night with all his courtiers and all the Egyptians, because there was a loud cry in Egypt, for there was no house where there was not someone dead. He summoned Moses and Aaron in the night and said, Up, depart from among my people, you and the Israelites with you. Go, worship Adonai as you said. Take also your flocks and your herds as you said, and be gone. And may you bring a blessing upon me also.
And Egypt was forceful on the people to hurry and let them go from the land, because they said, we're all dead. And the people carried off its dough before it was leavened, their bowls being wrapped in their garments on their shoulders. And the children of Israel had done according to Moses' word. And they asked items of silver and items of gold and garments from Egypt. And Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh had put the people's favor in the Egyptians' eyes, and they lent to them, and they despoiled Egypt. And the children of Israel traveled from Ramesses to Succoth, about 600,000 on foot, men, apart from infants. And also a great mixture had gone up with them, and sheep and oxen, a very heavy livestock. And they baked the dough that they brought out of Egypt, cakes of unleavened bread, because it had not leavened, because they were driven from Egypt and were not able to delay. And they also had not made provisions for themselves.
Thank you both so much. Mark and Betsy, would you like to read a little bit, beginning at verse 40?
You want to go?
Okay. The length of time that the Israelites lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of the 430th year, to the very day, all the ranks of the Lord departed from the land of Egypt. That was for the Lord a night of vigil to bring them out of the land of Egypt. That same night is the Lord's one of vigil for all the children of Israel throughout the ages.
The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, this is the law of the Passover offering. No foreigner shall eat of it, but any slave a man has bought may eat of it once he has been circumcised. No bound or hired laborer shall eat of it. It shall be eaten in one house. You shall not take any of the flesh outside the house, nor shall you break a bone of it. The whole community of Israel shall offer it. If a stranger dwells with you would offer the Passover to the Lord, his males must be circumcised, then he shall be admitted to offer it. He shall then be as a citizen of the country, but no uncircumcised person may eat of it. There shall be one law for the citizen and one for the stranger who dwells among you. And all the Israelites did so, as Adonai had commanded Moses and Aaron, so they did. That very day, Adonai freed the Israelites from the land of Egypt, troop by troop.
Thank you both so much. Robin, would you like to read beginning at the start of chapter 13?
Yes, thank you. Adonai spoke further to Moses, saying, "Consecrate to me every male firstborn, human and beast. The first male issue of every womb among the Israelites is mine." And Moses said to the people, "Remember this day on which you went free from Egypt, the house of bondage, how Adonai freed you from it with a mighty hand. No leavened bread shall be eaten. You go free on this day in the month of Abib. So when Adonai has brought you into the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, which was sworn to your fathers to be given you, a land flowing with milk and honey, you shall observe in this month the following practice. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the 7th day there shall be a festival of Adonai. Throughout the 7 days unleavened bread shall be eaten. No unleavened bread shall be found with you, and no leaven shall be found in all your territory. And you shall explain to your child on that day, it is because of what Adonai did for me when I went free from Egypt. And this shall serve you as a sign on your hand and as a reminder on your forehead, in order that the teaching of Adonai may be in your mouth, that with a mighty hand Adonai freed you from Egypt. You shall keep this institution at its set time from year to year."
Thank you, Robin. Thank you so much. And Justin, would you like to read beginning at verse 11?
Thank you, yes. "And it will come to pass, when the Lord will bring you into the land of the Canaanites, as he swore to you and to your forefathers, and he has given it to you, that you shall give over to the Lord whatever opens the womb. And every miscarriage that opens the womb of an animal will be yours. The males belong to the Lord. And every firstborn donkey you shall redeem with a lamb. And if you do not redeem it, you shall decapitate it. And every firstborn of man among your sons you shall redeem. And it will come to pass, if your son asks you in the future, saying, 'What is this?' you shall say to him, 'With a mighty hand did the Lord take us out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage.' And it came to pass, when Pharaoh was too stubborn to let us out, the Lord slew every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of beast. Therefore I slaughter, for a sacrifice, all males that open the womb, and every firstborn of my sons I will redeem. And it will be for a sign upon your hand, and for ornaments between your eyes. For with a mighty hand did the Lord take us out of Egypt."
Thank you so much, everyone. That's our entire Torah portion for this week. I'd like to share with you a little bit of focused study, and then we'll open it up everyone to have an opportunity to share your thoughts and reflections about this week's Torah portion. This week's Torah portion is reaching the climax of this terrible and dark period in the life of both the Israelites and the Egyptians. And when we started studying the book of Exodus, we talked about how the Kabbalistic tradition characterizes this period in Egypt as being a time when speech itself was in exile, and how part of the struggle is the capacity to regain speech. And what we mean by speech is not just vocalizing, not just saying things, that's part of it, but also hearing what someone is speaking to you. And so there's this terrible disease that's rampant throughout, as a pandemic, throughout Egypt, which is this disease of the exile of word, the exile of speech, and the need to regain and recapture this procreative power to speak and to hear. And we're now going through the last three plagues. These are plagues of darkness. And indeed, this is the darkest period of this terrible moment, which culminates in death of the firstborn. And it's all seems to have been generated as a result, in particular, of Pharaoh's incapacity to absorb a message that was being given to him, a message that he hardened himself to time and time again, until finally he was incapable of hearing any further, and he fulfilled himself as a person of stone, one might say. And that terrible incapacity to hear this message of freedom, of liberation, of dignity, results in terrible consequence, not just for himself personally, but for his entire country and for everyone, it seems. So here we are, we're now reaching this climactic moment. So what I'd like to do in terms of focusing our studies, you have the study sheet. I have a painting at the top by Lisa Brugger, who is a Los Angeles area artist. I encourage you to look online and discover more of her work. She did this painting that's called Light into Darkness. I was intrigued by that because usually we like to think about darkness into light, but she has painted something that she entitles Light into Darkness. And that for me is really visualizes the theme that I'd like to pursue with you, which is there is in this Torah portion a lesson about sometimes there's a need to go deeper into darkness before one can get to the light. So, and I've entitled this week's study session, Before a Going, There's a Coming. And that title is really inspired by the very opening verse from our Torah portion, which I've replicated here on the study sheet. In Hebrew, it's Vayomer Adonai el Moshe. You can translate that. Adonai said to Moses, Bo el Pharaoh. I don't know how your particular translation renders that phrase, Bo el Pharaoh. Mine says, go to Pharaoh, which in terms of the narrative seems to make sense. God is speaking to Moses and says, go to Pharaoh. You have to address him one more time. But what's curious is in Hebrew, if you were going to say go, you'd say lech. We're familiar with that term because we know lech lecha, go forth, which is what God says to Abraham. But here it doesn't say lech, it says bo. And bo in Hebrew, that means come. So of course, this provokes commentators throughout the ages. Why does God say come to Pharaoh instead of go to Pharaoh? So we're going to pursue it through a little bit of Kabbalah, and then we're actually going to, I think, draw some other interesting lessons from some other traditions as well. But here in number 2 is a bit of commentary on this from the great Kabbalistic piece of literature, the Zohar. And the Zohar says, why does it say, come to Pharaoh? It should have said, go to Pharaoh. The Zohar continues with its commentary. God brought Moses into a chamber within a chamber to the supernal and mighty serpent from which many levels evolve, which Moses feared to approach himself. When the Holy Blessed One saw that Moses was afraid the Blessed Holy One waged war against Pharaoh. So it's curious. This is now the concluding plague, the concluding series of plagues, the last few plagues here that Moses is now having to tell Pharaoh about or confront Pharaoh about. So by now, Moses has already done this several times, I think 6, 7 times. So why should Moses be afraid at this particular moment? The Zohar wants to know. And the Zohar's answer is that at this moment, Moses is being instructed to go to the very essence of Pharaoh. He's being instructed to confront Pharaoh in his deepest, darkest place, where all there is unadulterated evil, which is characterized here as a mighty serpent. And what's Moses' reaction this time? He's already gone several times, confronted Pharaoh several times, walked away from those confrontations all those times. Here, according to the Zohar, Moses was afraid. And what was he afraid of? The Zohar's understanding seems to be that he's afraid of encountering this degree of evil alone. Indeed, you think about that, and the fear of entering into something alone is perhaps one of our greatest fears. The fear of not only entering something alone, but entering something that's unseen into the darkness. The fear of both being, of confronting the unseen and of being unseen, of being alone. That kind of sense of being isolated, alone, unseen, unheard, unacknowledged in the dark can be so very paralyzing. So in response to recognizing that degree of fear that Moses has, God says to Moses, Bo, El Pharaoh, meaning come with me to Pharaoh. God is offering to be a companion, to keep Moses company in this series of final confrontations with Pharaoh. And so this is this encounter with going into the deepest, darkest place. And God is basically saying to Moses, you need to do this, and I will be with you when you go into that deepest, darkest place. This is one aspect of our Torah portion, this notion about this coming versus this going. But there's another part of our story that's a little confusing, which is, did the Israelites, did they leave Egypt? Were they redeemed from Egypt, from the slavery in Egypt, at nighttime or in the morning? So we have a couple of different verses which offer up different possibilities. One of them is from this week's Torah portion, chapter 12, verse 22. None of you shall go outside the door of his house until morning. Well, that makes it sound as if they spent a night of this final plague inside their homes during the nighttime, and then presumably they came out in the morning, and that's when they left. On the other hand, we're going to read months down the road in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 16, when Moses is retelling the story. He says in chapter 16, verse 1, it was in the month of Aviv at night that Adonai, your God, freed you from Egypt. So were they freed at nighttime, or were they freed in the morning? I want to suggest that what this is telling us is that to be free, to be redeemed from this dark place, this enslavement, was actually a two-step process. One at night, or one represented by nighttime, and one in the morning, or represented by the daytime. So in our story that we've been reading, the Israelites are in their homes during this period of what's called the night of vigil, a night of watching. I want to suggest that this night of vigil, this night of watching, is this moment when the Israelites themselves are in a dark place, going into a dark place, confronting their own darkness. And they are engaging in this period of self-reflection, of self-confrontation, in a sense, to rid themselves, to expiate from themselves whatever they have assimilated from their time in Egypt. That they are to, in a sense, expel their own pharaohs, their own sense of being slaves out of themselves. And that's something that they need to confront about themselves. And that's what's happening during this period of nighttime, this night of vigil, this night of watching. And then comes daytime. Now, once they've gone through this process of expelling from themselves all that they have assimilated and absorbed during their time in Egypt, then they are able to walk out with the possibility of becoming truly free human beings. So this, in our Torah portion, in chapter 12, through this process, we have chapter 12, verse 26, we have this lovely question. In Hebrew, it's Ma ha'avodah hazot lachem. Let's look and see how it's translated, at least in my edition. My edition says, and when your children ask you, what do you mean by this right? So this is Ma ha'avodah hazot lachem. It's probably familiar to us, not only from reading it in the Torah portion, but because every year, hopefully, we gather around a table and there are 4 questions that are asked, and this is one of them. Ma ha'avodah hazot lachem. This is a question that's asked by one of the children. It's asked by the child that's characterized as the wicked child, the provocative child. And really it gets translated as Ma ha'avodah, what is this? Let's say it's right, which is how it's translated here. What is this right, lachem, to you? So the word avodah is an interesting word. It's a word that we encountered at the very beginning of the book of Exodus. It's in chapter 1, verse 14. And there, avodah is a word that's used for the harsh labor, the servitude that was imposed upon the Israelites by Pharaoh. Avodah also means a service. In particular, it's a word that's used for sacred service. So it can either mean something that is imposed upon us, that is oppressive, that is a burden, that is something that we would do as enslaved people, or it can mean a sacred rite that we do in honor of the source of all life. So in a sense, this child is asking us at the Passover Seder, Ma ha'avodah hazot lachem. In other words, is this an avodah that we're doing, this Seder ritual? Is this to you something burdensome? Something that is getting in the way of eating the brisket that's there in the kitchen? Or is this for you a sacred rite that you are performing of your own free will out of a sense of sacred service and uplift? It's a good question. It's a question that we should look forward to being asked as a way to be able to answer it back to the children around the table. In fact, as we saw in this week's Torah portion at the very beginning in verse 2, we get this interesting little bit of instruction about what this Passover celebration is really supposed to be about. It says in verse 2, I'm doing all these things, God says, that you may recount to Saper in the hearing of your children and your children's children. The purpose of all this drama that's happening is really going to be only worthwhile if you remember to tell this as a story and not just recite this as dogma, as doctrine. So then there's something here that's already teaching us about how narrative can be liberating, because narrative, as opposed to dogma or doctrine, is engaging, it's involving, and it's personalizing. And that's what the children around the table want to know. Are you involved in this story, or are you just telling this story because you've been told to tell me this story? Is it something that courses through your life, or is it just from a book that you're reading that you've been handed? So you turn over. I'd like to share with you just this quote from this wonderful literary critic, Shoshana Feldman, from the book Testimony, Crises of Witnessing. Because that's, in a sense, what we're doing when we are narrating the story. We're testifying. We're bearing witness to something. So here's what she said. Texts that testify do not simply report facts, but encounter strangeness. Testimony is not a simple medium of historical transmission, but the unsuspected medium of a healing. So of course, you have people bearing witness, providing testimony only when there's some disagreement about what happened. We've encountered some moment, we're relating some event, and we're trying to figure it out. And so we're testifying about what we saw. And she indicates here that testimony is not a simple medium of historical transmission. You're not just reading a report about what happened, but there's some way in which it's an act of healing. And if you remember our Passover Seder, the Haggadah is really structured around a healing among generations. It's a story, it's a ritual of reconnecting one generation to another. So in a sense, that telling of the story is not just a recitation of doctrine, it's an actual bit of therapy. It's a way of healing the rift that inevitably occurs between generations. But we have a way to heal at least once a year that rift that is created just by natural circumstances between generations. And that's to tell the story and to reassure the children around us. This story is one that I'm involved in, that courses through me, and that I share with you as an act of sacred service, not as a burden. So with that, I'd love to hear additional thoughts and reflections that you have about this week's Torah portion. And David, you've got your hand raised. Go right ahead, unmute yourself.
Well, of course, I love the Wicked Child. It's about my favorite part of the Passover Seder. And when the Wicked Child, what does this avodah mean to you? When it says that, the the person replying is obviously very irritated. He's being asked, are you really, I mean, now the way I hear the question, he's being asked, are you just doing this by rote because it says you're supposed to? Or are you doing this as a sacred service? And so the answer that is given to the wicked child is not the one I'm looking at right here. This is the Passover sacrifice, because God halted at the houses of the children of Israel when he struck Egypt and he saved our houses. That's not what the response is. The response is, you're harem, you're not part of us. And since I'm a very rebellious and iconoclastic person, I picture myself in the role of a 15-year-old smartass, and my mental response is, right on. Goodbye. And then it's very, very provocative for me after that. And the other thing I always find quite provocative about it is, this is the most Jewish question that any of the 4 children ask. You know, they ask, what's this mean to you? Tell me about what you think. So in any event, it's going to make an already very complicated little piece of the Seder even funner for this guy.
Very good. I'm glad. Okay. And Richard. And you'll need to unmute yourself, Richard.
The Mishnah says, 10:5 of Mishnah Pesachim, in every generation a person is duty bound to regard himself as if he personally has gone forth from Egypt, since it is said, and you shall tell your child in that day, saying, it is because of that which the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. And I think when you say, the idea is when one says that, one feels that presence, and that's what's communicated to the person you're witnessing to. It's not a story you're telling. You're relating your experience, and you're connecting with the fact that that was your experience. We were there. I was there. We were all there. And if you say it enough times, you begin to feel it maybe. And that's what this is about. Is it your duty to do that and make that connection? Well, if it's true, it sure is. And how do you know that it isn't? And I wanted to say about the darkness, that made me think of the Creedence Clearwater song. I see a bad news rising, a bad moon rising. There's trouble on the way. And there's a lot of trouble there. And the thing that I notice is about the circumcision and about leaven. Leaven. How many times is the word leaven said in there? And don't do any of this. And then I connected it with the notion that what the Lord did for me, we didn't do this for ourselves. Our egos were not involved. We were not puffed up with leaven at all. We were totally the mechanism through which the Lord took Pharaoh on for what Pharaoh was, not just what he was doing to us, but for what he is. And that's what we were clearing ourselves of in that dark night. And I think last year or the year before, I wrote down that Rashi says that it was during the darkness, although it says in our text that the Jews, the Hebrews, had lights on during the night. Rashi says that in the darkness, the Israelites who did not wish to leave Egypt were struck down along with the Egyptians, and that it was done in the dark, so the Egyptians wouldn't see that God was punishing Hebrews as well. That's all I got.
Thank you, Richard. Others, Susan?
So this is a little bit, this is changing the subject a little. This story, you know, obviously I've heard it every year since I was a little girl at a Passover Seder, not to mention all the times that the story is told, you know, in the Torah and in children's books and such. And I know what slavery is. I grew up in the United States. I know what slavery is. And it wasn't until this year that I figured out that I didn't know the slavery that our ancestors went through. But I had always seen it through my lens, through the lens that I know of slavery, of Black slavery in this country. And it made me more aware of how difficult it is to see things through somebody else's lens, and how difficult it really is, and how it's really important when people think differently or live differently that we try to see things through their lens, at least to try to understand them. That's all.
Thank you so much. Susan. And other thoughts, comments, and reflections? So Jay, did you have something?
Sorry. Me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
What I notice is in the 5 books, is there any other festival or holiday described with such particularity and such thoroughness? It seems to me that, and the whole calendar is set by this holiday and etc. This is, I believe, quintessential to our story. It really is amazing that an entire prayer book basically springs out of this, the Haggadah. So reflect on that. Is this the most described holiday, or am I mistaken?
Well, we were asked over the weekend by some members of the family in Judaism, what is the most important holiday? And our first response was Shabbat is the most important. And then we said, and then Passover, because Passover is what brings the whole family back together and it reunites the family around a table, and the table in the home. It's the home where this ritual is reenacted, not just told, but as Richard was hinting at, this journey is something that we're going on right now. It's not something that happened a few thousand years ago. We're all dealing with pharaohs. And I don't just mean pharaohs outside of ourselves. We're also dealing with our inner pharaohs. And in a sense, that's what this darkness of the night of the vigil is all about. Is that the Israelites had to confront not just the pharaoh who was a single person sitting in a palace somewhere. They had to deal with how much of a pharaoh had become, they had absorbed in themselves. And that's what they had to rid themselves of during this night vigil of reflection and self-confrontation. And that's what they had to rid themselves of, that, this notion that it was acceptable to oppress, that, or to be oppressed, that it was acceptable to deal with life as merely an arena on which to exercise power over others. That they needed to rid themselves of that if they were to be truly free people who would then be living in a free society. Otherwise, they would replicate Egypt in their own nation. And so that's why this story is told, because we're reminded that we're on this journey. And that's what the notion about the leavening, the chametz, the Hasidic tradition in particular emphasizes. The chametz is not just something that's breadcrumbs that you find in your shelf that you need to get rid of. The chametz is also that within you which puffs you up, your excess ego. And you need to spend some time deflating that, to getting rid of that from this house, if you truly want to be free. So that is this wonderful drama that's going. Yes, Margot.
Earlier this evening, you talked about being alone and being afraid and being alone. And the image that came to my mind was of a soldier shooting at an enemy. He may have comrades on either side of him, but he is alone. And it's a terrible thing and a fearful thing.
Thank you, Margot. It is a fearful thing to hold that degree of power in your hands and to be forced to make a decision about to use it. So that is a terrible isolating power, which can have long-term impacts.
Yeah, and people do come home, quite.
Thank you for that. Other thoughts? Yes, Karen, would you like to unmute and share with us?
So I'm sure I have the book upstairs in my library, but I hopped on this so quickly that and everything is just kind of crazy in our household right now with my dad. So anyway, I'm sorry I wasn't prepared, but in trying to listen, hopefully it was improving my auditory skills. It struck me, having taught JCC preschool for so many years, and to simplify it for children, Pharaoh is bad and the Israelites are good and, nothing in between. But I remember that in some of the writings, it was, and I can't recall the words, but you will be able to, that God was sad that the Egyptians also drowned, that they were killing, Pharaoh's community as well. And that part today where it said the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, I often forgot that even though Pharaoh and the Egyptians and whoever in our world doesn't believe in one God or the same God, that God believes in them and has jurisdiction, if you will, not a great word, but over all mankind. And God did force the darkness on the Israelites and on Pharaoh so that we could get through it. And, the famous quote, it's darkest before the dawn. So I just thought a lot about that and what I don't think there's anybody in any community who hasn't experienced some sadness, anger, negative emotion, let's put it that way, or that COVID, or that in the last 4 years, and I won't get political, but nobody has been untouched. Let's put it this way. And for me, I feel like we have been plunged in darkness, and now I'm feeling hopeful. But I tried to remember, that I'm not alone. I have my family, I have my belief in God, and that I tried to reach out to people, even in my darkest, deepest time, tried to remember that there are others who, even if I don't agree with them, even if I don't even know them, everybody's been struggling, and even in good times in the world, people struggle. So I guess that's all I wanted to say. But my daughter had said to me, she's going to be giving birth, and she kind of looks at Judaism and religion and holidays as a time to just be with family and appreciate some of the traditions. But she doesn't really look any further. And to me, that's kind of the darkness in her. Maybe she'll be inquisitive as her child. Maybe she'll have the wicked child who will question. Because I said to her, what's going to happen if hopefully we'll have a very bright child and they start to ask questions about the traditions, about the holidays, about, and then you don't have the background to answer, or you can't explain the differences in the beliefs. And she didn't have an answer. So anyway, all of this is coming into my mind as we were reading today.
So these are precious moments in your life, some of them joyful, some of them heavy. And to the extent that this tradition of wisdom enables you to explore with open heart and with questioning, that seems to be the pathway towards responsibility and liberation. And so I'd like to conclude by, in fact, taking a word that means questioning and just spend the next 3 minutes just on verses that have to do with that. And before our session this evening, actually, Mark and I had some exchange via email on this theme that comes up in our Torah portion about the Israelites taking gold and silver from the Egyptians. And does that seem ethical? Does it seem right? Does that, what are you doing? You're just replacing, one culture took things from you and now you're taking things in that culture, and what's that all about? And in the exchange, I have to say that Mark shared with me a lot about Spinoza, and I learned a lot from him about Spinoza. It was very rich. And in fact, the material that he shared with me helped me see Spinoza as more of as a Buddhist adept rather than a member of the Jewish community, because the material talked about Spinoza's rejection of fame and celebrity and fortune, seeing those as ultimately leading to futility, the pursuit of those. And he rejected that, and instead said what's really important is to pursue the development of a good character, both personally and societally. So that was very rich. And what I got to share with Mark in exchange for his sharing with me about Spinoza was this notion that is developed by the Netziv. The Netziv is a rabbi in the 19th century, Naftali Tzvi Yehuda, who is one of the great Talmudic scholars. He was the head of the yeshiva in Volozhin. So here's this notion about taking from the riches from the Egyptians actually comes up 3 different times in the book of Exodus. And it starts out, the first time is in chapter 3, verse 22. It says, each woman shall sha'alah. So that comes from the verb sha'al, which means to ask or inquire, or it can mean to borrow. Okay, so each woman shall sha'alah from her neighbor and the lodger in her house objects of silver and gold. The next time it comes up is in chapter 11, verse 2. Tell the people, this is God's instruction, tell the people to yishalu, same verb, each man from his friend and each woman from hers objects of silver and gold. And then the third time is in the next chapter, chapter 12, verse 35. They yishalu, the narrative says, they yishalu, same verb, from the Egyptians objects of silver and gold. So what's interesting is that the verb of what is to be done is the same. The one to whom that verb is directed changes through those 3 verses. So the first time it says, each woman shall ask from her neighbor objects of silver and gold. The second time it says, tell the people to ask from their friend objects of silver and gold. And then the third time, they took from the Egyptians, or they asked from the Egyptians objects of silver and gold. So the question is, why does it shift from neighbor to friend to Egyptian in each of those. And the Netziv says something very interesting. He says, the first time this notion comes up, each woman shall ask from their neighbor objects of silver and gold, is before any of the plagues happen. And so before the plagues, the Israelites, the Hebrews had no friendly relations with the Egyptians. They had Egyptians only as neighbors, people who lived nearby. But after the plagues, especially those of darkness, which is what's happening here in our Torah portion, these 3 days of darkness where these last plagues take place. After these plagues, the relationship changes from neighbor to friend. And the Netziv says, what happened? What happened to cause that shift from neighbor to friend? And the Netziv's conclusion is that during this period of darkness, when the Egyptians couldn't even find their way to food, couldn't find their way safely about, the Hebrews went and helped them to get food. And so neighbors became friends. And in the course of this period of darkness, this period which is not just negative, but it's a period of deep reflection, confrontation with your worst urges, Egyptians began to understand what Hebrews understood about the nature of material things, which is that we don't own them. We only borrow them. That they are owned by the source of all life. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. We don't really possess fully and eternally anything. We're merely borrowers and users of those things. And so the very last verse that uses this notion about objects of silver and gold, it's now better rendered as the Hebrews borrowed from the Egyptians objects of silver and gold, because through the course of this dark night, having encountered this help and assistance from the Hebrews, the Egyptians themselves began to understand that it's to the value of overcoming this culture of power and possession, and began to appreciate what the Hebrews were teaching them, that we should share, that we don't really possess anything. Mark, is there something you wanted to share there?
I just wanted to thank you for clarifying for me the issue that I had with the borrowing, and your explanation has helped me understand and accept the Hebrews' response in this time of darkness. I also wanted to say that this happens to be our wedding anniversary, our 48th wedding anniversary.
Also,
We just wanted to be with you tonight, and want to thank you again for your leadership and your guidance and everything that you've meant to us through the years. And we just wanted to say thank you and hi to everybody.
Well, let me say this. I think I will say it on behalf of all of us, Mark and Betsy. It's a blessing to have you as part of this Shulchan PDX community. It's a blessing to know you. It is a blessing that you are together. We all wish for you many, 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 many more years of blessed relationship, for the gifts that you give to one another and the gifts that you give to us.
Mark, do Art and Diane know?
And
Mark?
so, Margo, let me just finish this up right here, which is that, Mark, I'm so grateful that you brought to my attention and asked me this question, because it got me to thinking a lot about it. And this notion that the Hebrews in a sense, redeemed Egyptians from their culture of oppression, death, and destruction, at least many of them. The Hebrew slave redeemed Egyptian oppressors from both the material consequence of darkness, the difficulty of finding things, including food, and from the spiritual darkness that they were living in, which is a pursuit of possession over the pursuit of relationships. Same thing is happening in our country as well. Because leading this country out of darkness and into a greater moral life has been those most impacted by the enchainment that began in 1619. It is extraordinary when those who have been oppressed become the redeemers of the oppressors themselves. So my hope and prayer for all of us that we will all emerge out of our own personal, as well as whatever social darkness there might be, that we will appreciate those who have helped lead the way, that we will continue to be not feeling triumphant in whatever emergence out into the light we are able to achieve, but we will do so humbly, continuing to open our ears to listen to the stories, especially of those who differ from us. Because only by continuing to open our ears as well as our mouths that we achieve freedom and redemption from the exile of the world. Thank you all very much for coming together. You enrich my life so much. Be well, everyone. Happy anniversary and a happy good day to everyone. See you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Have a wonderful